Okay, so welcome to the last talk of the Puppet track. Just before I hand you over to Simon, a couple of things. I know some people from Puppet are going to be staying afterwards to try and help tidy up. So if anyone sees anything on the floor, coffee cups or beer bottles, pick them up and put them in the bin. It'll make people's life a bit easier. And on that, I don't think he's in the room, but if we could have a big round of applause for Jose, who's, I think, nearly asleep by now after several, probably weeks of being up. He's done so much work sort of organizing this conference. So. And with that, over to Simon Janish from...
Yeah, good enough. I don't hold any grudges against not pronouncing my last name properly. I've given up a long time ago. I actually just recently got married, and my wife took the same last name. And she was like, you should say it the way it's said. And I'm like, I don't care. It's difficult enough. Anyway, it's Yakish, but as you can see, my first name is always Simon, much easier. All right, so I'm announcing one more time. Really, I'm counting on you more so than actually giving this to you, because I think there's a fair chunk of beer, but not necessarily enough people. So I think it will be gone. Okay, so I'm here to talk about, as you can see, ensuring continuous integration with Zenoss and Puppet. Who can tell that this was concocted by a marketing person, this title? So, what do? I am Captain Community, if I like to call myself, or also the Swiss Army knife. I've worked for Zenoss now for about 5 years. It's quite a long time, if you know the company. And I've been with the company from the very beginning. I just recently switched over to the community captain role, and I'm trying my best, as you can tell. I am probably the person that has the absolute least clue about Puppet at this entire conference, as a matter of fact. I'm a complete Puppet noob. I know what it does and how it works at a high level and that kind of stuff. And I've done some training, maybe like half a day or so. But I actually don't know how Puppet actually works under the covers, or would be challenged if I had to write a module or stuff like that. So just that up front. And I'm counting on you to actually call me out. Also, the integration with Puppet, as shocking as that might seem, it actually, I think it's a good thing, was actually a customer-driven thing, more so than anything. I was literally deploying with a customer, and the Puppet guys had literally been there the week before, and they said, hey, we got this over here and this over there, can you kind of make these two things do something at the same time together? And I was like, okay, yeah, sure, we can probably do that, and help me out. And so really the whole thing, the whole talk, the idea, everything is all around customer-driven requirements, more so than actually something artificial, which I guess is a good thing. And then really, I sucked you into this. I think coming to a conference, I'm certainly not in a position to actually talk about knowledge necessarily, not at a PuppetConf. So what I'm here is actually to suck knowledge from you rather than, so it's basically a beer for info kind of trade, if you wish. All right, so I'm going to talk about why Zenoss, what Zenoss lacks, right? So if you ever, who here has used or has heard of us? Let's start at the very beginning. Okay, that's very good. I'm happy about that. And who in here does not use some sort of monitoring / service assurance / whatever you want to call it with their Puppet deployment, be it Nagios or Zabbix or any of those? Is there anybody in the room that actually doesn't have this? Okay, that's also good. So basically, anybody in here knows more about this subject than me. Excellent. So anyway, so if you ever take a look at most monitoring solutions, as a matter of fact, right, any of the ones that I've mentioned, including ourselves, really, what they all lack is serious instrumentation, right? In our case, we have like a pretty GUI thing that essentially helps you to trigger some commands, but it gets very tricky, it's unwieldy, it doesn't really do its job asynchronously. It's basically something that is a kind of nice to have, but doesn't really get like the job done when you actually have to rely on it. Also, we have no provisioning, right? So that makes scalability very difficult for us, right? Auto-scaling, we tell the story, but obviously you got to have something else in place to actually auto-scale your equipment, right? And we have no such thing. And then obviously also for changes, so Zenoss actually has an ability to pick up changes, and we have the notion of going into an environment and picking up the modeling changes. And when your infrastructure gets a new file system, your server loses an interface, there's something along those lines, very component-based things. But when it comes to the applications, which is really a strength of Puppet, we essentially have no ability to actually get deep inside views or pick up those changes or anything of that nature, right? So with that, now that we know where we're lacking, who else to tell you what Puppet lacks than somebody that has no idea about Puppet, right? So in this case, I think, and I'm happy to be corrected, and there will be a Q&A session at the end of this. So you can either scream or throw tomatoes or your empty beer bottles, or you can just wait until the Q&A session at the end. But as you probably have figured out, because everybody in here uses monitoring, Puppet lacks really where Puppet checks out is after deployment configuration. So you deploy and then you bust, right? So there's no notion after that. There really isn't a system, and there really isn't a system of real-time eventing, alarming, monitoring built into Puppet, right? That's why we all use some sort of substitute for that as well. So with those two, situations that both systems lack something, really what I've been joking with our CEO and others is, somebody should make Zen puppies, right? So because it's a very unique handoff scenario, right? It's like, I call it also the life cycle nirvana, because exactly where Puppet checks out, Zenoss checks in, and so you get a more holistic, automated life cycle as a whole, right? Also, both of the systems actually have architectural similarities as well. In this case, we're talking about MCollective, for example, uses Rabbit as a backend, as far as I'm right? Am I informed correctly here? Is that correct? Thumbs up? Yes. Good. We actually also use Rabbit as a backend for our event system, or will be using it very soon when the 4.2 version of Core comes out. So there's similarities there. There's similarities in the sense that we're both made for scale, right? So both, this is obviously to be taken with the objective view of an outsider necessarily, but both Zabbix and Nagios probably lack some of the scalability capabilities that we have, the distributed capabilities, and the overall scale of a system that we can have. And so I think that fits very well with Puppet, where environments tend to be fairly large, and you basically have to have a system that has the capability of handling many checks or servers or devices or whatever you want to call them. And also, I think culture and community-wise, we try to align ourselves as a good citizen. I know that there has been some discrepancies with that in the past, and we're trying to correct those. But both of the cultures and communities in the Puppet and Zenoss are very similar, right? There's active forums, active mailing lists. There are plugins in the sense that you can basically write modules and share them with others, or Zen packs and share them with others. So both platforms are extremely extensible and really geared towards a participation from a technology aspect as well. So really, it's a great fit, right? As I said, it's almost like there should be Zen puppies, right? Okay, so where can Zenoss help? Where can Puppet help Zenoss very concretely? So this is obviously, is system maintenance. As I mentioned before, we actually have in the wild with customers out there deployments of like, up to 60 servers. They're all deployed throughout the US at customer sites. And if you have 60 servers with all the same OS and they all need to be patched and the same configuration, what better thing is there than to use Puppet for that, right? Targets need to be configured, right? Servers and so on and so forth need agents installed. They need to be configured correctly. You need to do this across many systems very quickly and effectively. It's a perfect application for Puppet. And then obviously also deploying of plugins. I don't know if everybody knows this in here. Our preferred kind of Unix agent that we have, that we bring to the table essentially is NetSNMP. NetSNMP is actually an extremely powerful agent. There's lots of plugins that are available, or you can actually write your own. It pretty much takes any scripting language you can do, and you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. However, the problem with those is always what we hear from customers is that we basically have a problem deploying these, right? So we can't get them out, it's too difficult to the servers, and so on and so forth. So we have a perfect answer for, in this case, for Puppet. All right, and then obviously there's some use cases, and this is kind of the last thing that I want to bring to the table. I was hoping to actually have screenshots here, but as I was sitting over here, I was digging through my screenshot library, and I unfortunately forgot them. I will make up for this, which I will bring up later. But anyway, so these are all real-life use cases that we have either with customers or with systems out there. The first one is deployments, right? So as I mentioned before, deploy. Actually, our support guys internally use Puppet as well. So if they want to, customer calls in, has a problem, I have this version of Zenoss installed. Hey, I want to go and reproduce this. Well, we don't have like all versions of Zenoss ready to use at all times, right? So we've implemented a system where we basically spin up or provision a new box. It installs the Zenoss version. It installs all the patches that are available for this, so that the customer has applied, and then you have a system that you can reproduce this with. The second scenario is add, delete, and assign synchronization, right? So obviously, when you roll out a new system with Puppet, you want to go and add that system into Zenoss. Obviously, you want to do this automated. So we've written modules to actually go and have this happen. The same with deletions and the same with modifications or assignments, right? So when you have a Tomcat server, that might go into a different grouping or device class, as we call them, than a Apache server. And so you might want to go and do these assignments as maybe roles for systems change and so on and so forth. As I mentioned before, a thing that Puppet really lacks and makes it a little bit difficult, and probably people use something like Splunk or Logstash instead, is logs, right? Syslog. Puppet produces syslog messages. The agents do, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Agents produce syslogs, good. So as a result, you kind of want to aggregate all this. Well, with Zenoss, you already have a system that actually has an ability to index a large amount of these events, makes them available very quickly, and you can basically see what's going on at any given point. And you can actually alert accordingly as well. Which brings me to the next point, configuration drift. The customer that I've talked about earlier actually had a need. That's what they wanted to have done. That's the first thing, was to log into each of the nodes, run, or he was actually the master, run the config drift command, whatever that might be. I don't actually know. They gave me the command. Sorry. And then basically scrape the output and process the output and register the last time the configuration was changed or the last time the configuration was applied to the system inside us. So when they navigated to Zenoss, they clicked on a button, boom, 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 went to the server overview page, and they immediately could see when the Puppet configuration was the last time applied. When there was a discrepancy or there was a drift that would happen, then it actually alerted, there was an event generated, and you would see basically, oh, whoop-de-doo, there's a problem with this, right? Also, as I mentioned before, Zenoss actually lacks the ability to have deep application insights, right? It's very difficult. We have to write model plugins. It can be a very time-consuming thing. And so really what we've done on this front is actually we've written a factor plugin. So we go out, we query the factor information, we pull back that info, and we pick what we want from that and basically suck that configuration in and represent it accordingly. And then you can use that information in turn to actually then apply the correct Zenoss templates, right? So if you find a Tomcat server, if you find a memcached server, a MySQL server, you can automatically apply the MySQL server details to that system based on what factor knows about it. And then lastly is instrumentation, right? So as I mentioned before, I think MCollective is an awesome system. It makes a much better instrumentation system than actually, literally asynchronously, synchronously going and pinging all the devices that you just selected in a group or something along those lines. And so it's very nice to have a system such as MCollective, and we're actually working. This is almost done on an implementation where we basically have a GUI inside of us, and it then, when the GUI triggers the command, it basically goes and kicks off the command in MCollective and executes them across all the devices that need to see this as well. So that's kind of the last thing. And those are the use cases that we've basically either run across, have been asked about, or so they're real scenarios and there's real code out there in the wild. Which brings me to my last point. So we actually have a Zenpack out there now. There are actually many Zenpacks, and there have been many in the past 2 to 3 years. This Zenpack is actually an attempt to consolidate all of this. It is by no means complete at the current point in time. There is actually an upcoming conference which will require me to do more work on this and actually consolidate. So what I'm going to be doing over the next 1 to 2 weeks, if you guys remember my talk and come back, then you can check back on this, and basically there'll be plenty more. It'll be an ongoing process. There's lots of people collaborating, our internal support people, some of the guys that are in the field deploying, and so on and so forth. So it would be great if you guys could kick in and either leave comments, test out stuff, make improvements, that kind of stuff. That's why it's up there. I also have some questions for the audience. And then that really is the end of my talk already. But to bring up the questions that I had specifically, because we sat together about this the other day, and we're mulling over this. When people say that they have monitoring deployed, what do you guys have? Just toss it out. Are we talking Munyon, Nagios? Okay. Cloud. Say what? Okay, yeah. Hey, hooray. Okay, cool. And do you care in general about agentless or agent-based anymore? Now, you guys are all Puppet users, right? So technically, it doesn't matter to you, right? If you need a complete, I heard somebody was using server density, which basically, do they have their agents now in the standard repo, or do they still have an outside repo? Okay, so yeah, so there you go. So basically, the agentless versus agent-based stuff is part of history, I think. Does anybody use Ganglia? Ganglia, some users. And what about Munyon? Okay, cool. All right, good. And then, so I think that for the people that use Nagios, the way I see is, do you find it to be tricky with Nagios? I think for us, it might actually be an issue But do you find it to be tricky to have to rewrite the Nagios? If I'm correct, the Nagios recipe, a module that is out there right now, is rewriting the configuration every time from scratch. Is that correct or no? Does it respect the Nagios persistency? Do you guys know? Yes? No? You don't have no idea what I'm talking about?
The native types, because Puppet has a native type for Nagios.
Okay, so there's well, there you go. So that's even better then, right? Yeah. So this is really not an issue. But if you wouldn't have native types, wouldn't it not be an issue to actually have a configuration that some pieces you can't remove and some pieces you can, right?
You could break it up into pieces without, and that way, if only if that particular piece changed, you actually trigger a refresh.
Okay. So we've just talked about this recently, and it was like a problem for us to kind of envision a scenario where, somebody would tear down their entire infrastructure and then have to sync up the configuration that we have with the configuration that's the reality, which. Okay, cool. All right, are there any questions for you guys out there? And actually, there might be some questions with relation to our, that are maybe Puppet unrelated, seeing as I can't really answer them. Do you guys have any questions with regards to anything?
Question.
Sure.
You mentioned configuration drift and detecting that with Puppet.
Yep.
So do you send SNMP message? Do you send an SNMP trap when you detect configuration drift, or do you actually make Puppet fix the configuration drift?
Log in, and I think you can the way the customer did it was they basically did it from the map, was trying to detect the configuration drift, and basically, but you could also go, if you log into the server via SSH, you run the appropriate command, you pick up the output, and then you just generate it, like the system generates an event. It doesn't have to be an SNMP trap, it could be something else. And then you can via the same method to also go and fix it as well if you decided to do so. In this case, we didn't do so because the customer was a little sensitive and actually wanted to see the differences first in the event before they would just go and blindly fix it. But yeah, I guess there is a way to just say roll right over these changes, right? Obviously, technically do that very easily.
When does the new version of Zenoss come out with the routing feedback end and all that?
We are currently targeting, and this is all somewhat flexible, as you guys know in the software world. We're actually targeting currently the beginning of December to end of December, maybe worst case scenario, and a beginning of January. That's kind of the thing we're looking at.
Will that include the factor?
Actually, we will have, those hooks won't be there out of the box. They'll be part of the Zen pack, and we're hoping to have that Zen pack way before that, completed and all that kind of stuff. So there'll be announcements on the blog. I'll also be at a couple of other DevOps conferences, which I will probably do more in-depth demos of the Zen pack as well. Cool?
I have one more question.
Sure.
Does the Zen pack use any of the new UI stuff that's coming up in Puppet Dashboard?
No, and I wasn't actually aware of Puppet Dashboard until about 2 weeks ago, I think. That's when I was first shown this. I think it would actually be awesome to have deep linkages from one product to from one GUI to the next GUI, and you could just click on our stuff or click on something inside of Puppet and bring the two together. I went to some talks that gave me some ideas on that front as well, so I think it makes sense. But the dashboard thing is kind of new, right? Is that not correct?
Yes, it's not out the next month.
Okay, so, but yeah, no, I love the dashboard, right? This is another reason, this would do a great puppy color, right? Is the Zenoss UI and the dashboard, the Puppet dashboard is also another one. Yeah.
So I've never heard of Zenoss before today. Is it open source, commercial, what?
This is a very loaded question. Maybe So I think you could call us open core. I know this has like a bad taste, an aftertaste. So in reality, we have a product that is entirely GPL'd. So GPL2, it's out there. You can use it. We've accepted contributions from outside. We have Zen packs, about 200 contributions. We are not Apache licensed, like Puppet, for example. We also have a commercial version of the same thing. And what we do is we install our own Zen packs on top of that we create those Zen packs. And we like to think that they're like excellent and they're worth paying for, and you would want to be a customer because of them. So that's how we make the money, basically. So so you could think of us as an open core, but we don't like try to, like, you can get to our software without ever giving us our name, your name. You know, like, there's no need to register. It's GPL. You can change it. We have lots of people out there that use the software. We have about 10,000 deployments. I mean, I'm not very objective, as you might figure, but I like to think it's probably the best free as in beer and free as in freedom monitoring application that's out there today. That's probably because I'm like, you know, in a cloudy environment and working on it every day hard to improve it. You know, the UI looks pretty slick. It scales well. There's lots of plugins. There's a fair chunk of support in forums. So yeah, I like to think of like Nagios and other Zabbix as to kind of the thing of the past, really. And we're actually moving, and this is something that really isn't like public, but I guess we're in a private space here. We're actually moving to GitHub as well, right? So we'll be actually out there, and you'll be able to contribute and download the source and all that kind of thing.
Could you just go over like a quick compare contrast between Nagios and Zenoss?
Sure, yeah. So everything in Nagios rotates around a check, right? So it's very atomic checks, and so it's, to get started, I always say nobody just uses Nagios. And I think that has held true so far, because you can't. Nagios essentially, and I shouldn't be saying this publicly, but I will because I've already had a beer, so. Nagios is essentially nothing but a glorified cron daemon, right? It basically, it has its query, it substitutes commands, executes them on a schedule, and then basically tells you when they don't return the proper exit code, and that's it, right? So what we try to do is we try to, first of all, make it more approachable. So we have like really, really nice things like setting up your thing, and we'll have like ISO images you can download and VMware player images that basically are already ready to use as soon as you boot, and we have a pretty UI that looks sexy, and we have a UI designer that actually went through the process of kind of thinking about the workflow and how the application works. So we're really trying to provide a more like, and so like let's think about a host, right? You go to a host, you install NetSNMP on that host, which is kind of the premier installation. You can also use SSH for us to monitor the 10 seconds to enter the IP for that host and basically have us automatically discover. When we automatically discover, we find all the routes, the interfaces, all the file systems. There's automatically like default templates that get applied that we then start monitoring fairly sensibly. You know, we pick up memory, we pick up CPU and start monitoring those. So there's lots, like less effort involved, and you'll get a lot more with less work, essentially. It kind of, I think Nagios is great, right? It's extremely stable, it's easy to understand, and so on and so forth, but it's very frustrating because we're like, you know, there's this saying, something has to be 10 times better before people will actually start switching away from it, right? Like for a long time, IE6 was a horrible browser, right? And we probably all have used Chrome and Firefox for decades at this point, right? But like, how long has it taken regular moms and pops to actually switch away. And that's kind of how I feel about Nagios and Zenoss, right? It's like, and we're not, I think what people are a little afraid of is that as soon as they download, they'll have like a salesperson on the other hook and trying to sell them. We have never done this. We've never done this. I will not allow this. Nobody even inside of Zenoss is trying to do this, and you can completely get a hold of the software without actually ever giving you your name. And we have lots of customers, and I think at one time Google and Facebook and all the big ones have used us, and we don't really know, right? So.
You're talking about having this wizard process of set the processes or your checks, but at some point somebody's going to have to write code, right? So for instance, if I want to connect to an Apache server and give it a request, I need the check to return back that it returned exactly what I expect. How could I do that with the wizard?
Oh, yeah, so the wizard is, I was just kind of showing how that would actually, how we're trying to improve the user experience as a whole. We don't actually want, you can, if you want, knock yourself out. We have great documentation, and there's a whole plugin framework that you can use similar to your modules and so on and so forth. So that's great. But in the case of Apache, there already is a Zenpack that's available. You install that Zenpack, and it basically just uses the Apache status page. So it just connects to the status page, gets all the metrics. You can see immediately how many updates, how many gets, how many puts are being pushed against your server at any point in time, and you can scale accordingly then, right? So. There is, in that case, yes, there is a Twill Zenpack that we have. I don't know if you've heard of Twill before. It's like a Python, it's fairly simplistic, but it's a Python-based scripting language that you can use. You do go http google.com, and it goes there, and then you can say follow Google+, and it clicks on that link, and you can measure the time it takes between each, and you can check for return codes or certain regex. You can actually extract certain metrics off that page as well and pull them in. So in that case, you would probably use that. You can obviously also, the best part is, we would be stupid if we wouldn't be. You can actually take your Nagios plugins and run them right inside of Zenoss as well. And we understand, we have a compatibility mode that you can just turn on in the GUI for that particular command, and it just does that thing. But yeah, we have SSH as well. So, but yeah, your Nagios plugins, you can use them, right? We would be there's an endless amount of checks, so it'd be silly if we wouldn't utilize that. Anyway, so I'm actually sorry for turning this into a Zenoss session. I guess it somehow turned into that. So yeah, I'm going to be hanging out, probably cleaning up some of the beer bottles, and then also making sure that they are gone. So I'm probably going to harass some of you to actually drink more. All right, thank you very much, guys. It was nice.